back. It's Gridiron 360 on the mic. I'm Dave. That's Bill. We're here to give you a...
You're Dave?
I'm Bill. That's Dave. Yes.
Had a few cocktails before the show.
Yeah, I didn't do that, but this is my brain is cold from the cold here. It's abnormally cold in Atlanta. We are going to do a little college football all-encompassing on this, and we're going to keep this thing to an hour, I promise. We're going to keep it to an hour. We're going to run through the first half of the show, being a recap of the important games we saw this past weekend, Week 11, and a preview of the upcoming games of importance this weekend in Week 12. We're going to shut it down, get this out and up, and we are going to recut to talk about the college football playoff rankings. What do you say, D? Sound good?
Let's do it, Dave.
Yeah, all right. So the first game we want to hit on is Iowa State and Oklahoma. Iowa State coming into this game 5-3, so a plus 500 record. Obviously, Oklahoma 7-1, ranked what were they, 9, I think, in the playoff ranking last week.
Yep.
Really, the Big 12 was kind of hurting from the outside looking in, but we're going to stick to the games themselves.
Perception is they are going to have some magic happen
Yeah.
to get in. Is kind of the standing view of the talking heads.
Yes. So, look, Oklahoma, they've had their one loss. It wasn't a great loss to Kansas State. They have Iowa State, good team. Matt Campbell's great coach, come to town. And for the most part, Oklahoma had this game under control. The whole game until the fourth quarter, where Iowa State dropped 20 on them to their 0. And really, I think the biggest thing, and if there was any talks of Jalen Hurts still having a shot at the Heisman, he had a very un-Heisman-like moment throwing a pick late in the game that was really just kind of a brain fart for him if you watch the game. And it allowed... the Iowa State, they didn't give up. Brock Purdy allowed him to drive down the field. Kid went 19-30 for 282, but he had 5 TDs. They ran the ball well, 18 carries for 110 yards from their lead back, Breece Hall. On the flip side, Jalen Hurts, 18-26, 273, 3 TDs, 1 pick. He also had 2 TDs on the ground, 22 yards rushing, or 22 carries for 68 yards rushing. Their lead back, Kenny Brooks, 15 for 132 and a TD. So, again, for the majority of the game, Oklahoma had it under control. But it came down to a 42-41 score was their final, with Oklahoma winning. And, again, that's with Iowa State dropping 20 in the fourth quarter and attempting to go for a 2-point conversion at the end of the game to win the game, much like Clemson, North Carolina.
Yep.
Didn't get it. Oklahoma holds on.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say this. One guy who really improved, and not that he had a whole lot to improve upon, but I think improved his look, was CeeDee Lamb. Had a great game in this game. But, yeah, I mean, listen, simple fact. When the perception out there, and, again, the committee is the final determiner of this, but when the perception out there is that you're on the outside looking in with that one loss, obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but with a relatively disrespected conference, I mean, they've got an undefeated team on the outside of the top 10 coming into this game. Oklahoma needed to make some noise. Offensively, they did it, but they have slowly but surely kind of shown that their defense is not back to form. They look much better earlier in the year.
Correct.
Iowa State is not a chump program. You talked about their coach. I mean, this is a scrappy team. I like them, but it's not the look that Oklahoma needed in this game. Letting them back in.
Again, I don't want to dwell on the rankings, but obviously with the first one, the one knock on my team was that we skated by against North Carolina in the same exact situation, and they came out and said that after the first week that hurt. So this certainly doesn't. They need, if Oklahoma were to have a shot, they would need to kind of be a little more impressive, and they had the same situation. CeeDee Lamb, 8 for 167, 2 TDs. This guy gets the ball in his hands. He is one of the most dynamic wide receivers in college football. You put him right up there with any of our guys, with any of the Alabama guys, man, I don't care. This guy, he gets the ball, and he literally has an entire defense that ends up running after him.
Yep.
And he outruns the entire defense, at least 60% of the defense. It's incredible. He is a really, really good wide receiver. I'm excited to see what he can do at the next level. I mean, he's somebody that I'd be interested to see where he ends up.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma offensively is very explosive. They're a fun team to watch. Again, there is still a chance for them, certainly, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the preview. But this was a look they kind of had to have, I think, against Iowa State. Iowa State's played competitive against ranked teams. I mean, their losses, include Oklahoma State, Baylor, and then obviously Oklahoma. So, I mean, and they were all close losses.
Yep.
So that's kind of where they stand right now.
I think the end of the day, it's what you said a minute ago. It's the Oklahoma defense. Would they be better this year? They came out the gates. We talked a lot about them. It looked like it was much improvement from years past, but now they're kind of settling back into what we're used to seeing in those Big 12 defenses, which isn't really what you want. You'd hope bringing in this coordinator they did that it would make a difference for them, but not so much. So we're not going to, again, stay too long on these games. We'd rather spend some time on the two big games of the day, but tough. Good. Oklahoma won. You can't fault them for winning. You got to just win.
Yep.
You never know what can happen, and Iowa State is a decent team. So next game, and before we go to it, I want to give a congratulations to you, my friend. Florida State getting a win under interim head coach Odell Thurman.
Odell Haggins.
Odell Haggins. I've asked you a lot about it because this is a guy that's been on the staff since the Bowden era. You obviously have made statements that it's not a guy that necessarily wants the job. Maybe that'll change depending on the rest of the year plays out. I tell you something, if you somehow find a way against Florida, then you could see a different mindset in the guy. So.
I'll maybe take 3 minutes at the end of this and give a little kind of update on where I stand with that, because I do think that's important for the framework of college football as we go forward. You and I have talked about the importance of, when we talk about these rankings, we're going to talk about the need for conferences to strengthen themselves and kind of where we're at as ACC.
Yep. So let's go to the next game. Undefeated Baylor, who came into the week. What were they ranked? Do we remember?
They were 12.
They were 12?
This is playoff ranking. They were 12 coming into this week.
Okay, they were 12. They go to TCU to take on a scrappy TCU team that was sitting at 4-4. But we know that Gary Patterson, defensive-minded coach of TCU, and the reality is he, people are, what's wrong with TCU? I mean, it's not the defensive side, because statistically TCU is the best defense in the Big 12 right now. Still doing his thing. It's the offense that's really not getting it done for TCU. Their quarterback, Max Duggan, goes 14 of 32 in the game, 140 yards, 1 TD, 3 picks. On the other side, Charlie Brewer, 27 of 41, 195, 2 TDs and a pick. I think the thing to notice is Baylor didn't score a touchdown in this game till they hit the overtime.
Right.
And that's, so TCU really took it to them. It was a triple overtime game in which Baylor actually scores and misses the extra point. And it's TCU's turn. Unfortunately, Duggan throws a pick in the end zone. I think it was a 4th down play. And Baylor picks it off and ends the game. So they sneak through there. But, again, I said it before. This Matt Rule, 3 years ago, this team with all the problems that were going on under the Briles era, this team was left for dead. Then 2 years ago, they had one win, and they're still kind of just like, oh boy,
it's looking ugly.
Last year they go 7-6 or what did they go?
Over 500.
Yeah, they just went over 2 games over 500, and now they're undefeated. So you got to give credit. It doesn't matter how it gets done. They're just getting it done. And I know some of the game control and the eye test and strength of schedule and strength of rank and FPI are all in the mix in this thing. But, I mean, they're doing a really good job of just handling their business. They still got everything in front of them, in my mind. It's going to be though the Big 12 is kind of on the outside of this whole thing looking in, I feel it's hard to argue an undefeated Big 12 champ in Baylor not getting consideration. Again, we'll leave a lot of that for later. But to the game itself, I give it to them. This isn't an easy team playing TCU. Gary Patterson, great coach. The fact that they couldn't put a touchdown on the board the whole game was a little perplexing to me. And then all of a sudden, but this happens in college football. Yep. I've seen it before where all of a sudden nothing happens all game. You get to the end of the game, whether it's the fourth quarter or overtime, and all of a sudden the scoreboard starts to light up.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and I'm going to give a little spoiler on this one, but look, here's the simple fact is there has been a massive devaluing of defense across football, pro and college, over the last several years. But when the truth comes out and the final teams play, in the championship, it is going to be all about defense. It's going to be about who can handle it. Now, the problem you mentioned with Baylor is, and the touchdowns, there's no way they go through the playoffs, if they were to make it, without playing a seriously high-powered offense, because the top of the rankings are flooded with them. The real question I have about those teams is how well can they play defense when all else gets said and done? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later. So that is an important thing. I think what you mentioned about them not being able to score a touchdown until overtime, we'll see what happens. You can talk about game control and all that stuff, but the simple fact is the most important stat in college football, in my mind, if you are a Power 5 team, is the number after the dash, and that's still 0. So look, good on Baylor. It's a win. It wasn't pretty, but you can win not pretty all year long and be a champion.
And they did. I mean, we've talked about it last week about them potentially playing to the level of their competition, whether that's good or bad. Either way you look at it, they've gotten it done. 23-21 over Iowa State, 33-30 over Texas Tech. However, on the flip side, you got a Kansas State team that beat Oklahoma that Baylor beat 31-12. You got an Oklahoma State team that's in the rankings that they beat 45-27.
Yep.
So, I mean, they're getting it done. I mean, I know there's so much in this just to be able to separate the men from the boys, so to speak, on how it's done, but they're getting it done. And, with the big matchup with Oklahoma this weekend, they still have Texas on the schedule in the Big 12 championship.
And Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, they have Oklahoma this weekend,
right.
Texas, and then you have the Big 12 championship, which is
could be a rematch.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be quite a conundrum if they end up winning out and winning the Big 12, saying they don't deserve to be there because of them just getting by some teams. So next game, Maryland, Ohio State. We'll also lump into this the Iowa-Wisconsin game. Chase Young, the superstar DN for Ohio State, has been given a 4-game suspension. So he was not playing this game. Didn't matter one bit. Final score, 73-14, Ohio State. Maryland is awful. They won a few games early in the year, and they haven't won since. Their quarterback, Josh Jackson, was 4 out of 9, 35 yards and a TD. I'm guessing maybe he came out of the game because they have a backup quarterback, Tyrell Pigrome, who went 4 for 8, 42 yards, no TDs, and a pick. Not really going to get it done there. They weren't, McFarland is the big back for them. He had 6 carries for 7 yards.
Yeah, I mean, this was a slaughter. It was an expected slaughter. I do want to give Ohio State a lot of respect for the fact that hanging 70-plus points on anyone is a huge deal. And mind you, they got 3 deep in their quarterbacks. They had, 8 players running this game. I mean, guys catching the ball. Again, they were probably a little PO'd, I imagine, with the Chase Young thing. So, and they showed it. But look, and again, another spoiler alert I will do is kind of taking care of business and why that's not rewarded sometimes. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is a game. I guess what's interesting to me, though, is, and I want to kind of set this up with the Iowa-Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin, I was high on Wisconsin watching them play several weeks ago. but there's a team that's kind of, they won a game, 24-22, I think they beat Iowa. It was a 2-point win.
Yep, 24-22 in Wisconsin.
Yeah, Iowa's not terrible. They were at home. This was a game where they still very much had a shot at Minnesota in a sense. I mean, granted, Minnesota played the early game, but if Minnesota would have lost to Penn State and Wisconsin beats them, they're right back in the Big Ten championship. And in my mind, they kind of laid an egg. So then I kind of go back to the power of this conference a little bit, and I just think that's kind of going to be interesting as this plays out, because you're watching, what we thought 3 weeks ago was, hell, they got 3 undefeated teams that are all could be playoff worthy, and now we're starting to separate the men from the boys a little bit, and everything's not quite looking the way it did a few weeks ago.
The media narrative, and I think that there are some really good teams in the Big Ten, but the media narrative, I think, might be giving them a little more love than they actually deserve. There are some really strong teams with your Minnesota and your Ohio State, obviously. But then there's a mishmash of these teams, with even Iowa now sitting at 6-3 after this weekend, Wisconsin at 7-2, Penn State at they're 8-1 or 7-1.
Yep.
You got Michigan at 7-2, 8-2.
Yep.
So there's kind of this mishmash, and I don't know if we really know the identity of these teams. I thought we did. I mean, shoot, Jonathan Taylor's been a little quiet, but he went 31 carries for 250 yards. Didn't see the end zone on the ground, but he had a phenomenal game. I think that one of the bugaboos for Wisconsin is their quarterback. I mean, Cone was 16-25, $173, 2 TDs and a pick. And I when it comes down to it, you can only be one-dimensional for so long in this game.
Yeah, well, I think a big thing is, and we heard this on the radio, it was really interesting, so I went and looked at it, because I hadn't really watched Iowa enough for this, but something just kind of interest was the fact that this team has actually, it's almost dead even field goals to touchdowns, and their inability to get in the end zone, and that was brought up, Iowa.
Iowa.
Yes. So
yesterday.
And it's kind of about Nathan Stanley, can he really take over a game, which I think we're seeing it's kind of a struggle. But interestingly, Wisconsin was able to control them somewhat on the ground. I mean, they were about 5 yards a carry, but they only ran the ball like 18 times in this game. So, kind of looking at the way the game script and everything goes, I'm looking at this and, we're talking about Ohio State and, we're going to get into all these pretty scheduling things, but this is why you kind of play them. And I look, college football and pro football are very similar in this. They are copycat leagues. So, for example, you look in the pros and you see the Patriots go down to the Ravens, and everybody starts to go, did the Ravens figure out a game plan to beat the Patriots? And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not true. Sometimes it's just a bad game. But you kind of look at Wisconsin and say, wow, did someone figure out, did Illinois kind of show something about Wisconsin? And now teams are starting to play a certain way against them, and now all of a sudden they're coming back down to earth. So, again, you got to kind of watch this, and this is why these games are so important. So, anyway.
Don't get it twisted. 31 carries for 250 yards is incredible.
You should dominate that game.
Yeah.
You should dominate that game.
So what's wrong? In my mind, that's, again, they're too one-dimensional.
Yep.
The difference between a Jack Cohn and a Justin Fields, a Jack Cohn and a Joe Burrow, a Jack Cohn and a Tua, Jack Cohn and Trevor Lawrence, it's night and day. It's night and day. I'm sorry. He's just not there yet.
Yep.
And that's ultimately at the end of the day going to be one of the biggest bugaboos for a team like that. And quite frankly, that's those middling teams that I'm talking about in the Big Ten. Like, what is Shea Patterson, right? We saw, I think we got a real good taste of what Sean Clifford was, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
I'm just not sure. There's a lot of love for the Big Ten. Yes, they're strong, but it's a lot of media narrative that spins this story. So let's go to the next game, and I don't want to sit on it too long, and that was Missouri traveling between the hedges to take on the Georgia Bulldogs, who came in last week at 6 in the playoff rankings, had to keep winning.
Mm-hmm.
They did. They blanked Missouri. This is a bad Missouri team right now. A lot more was expected from this team from the get-go. Transfer quarterback Kelly Bryant is out. The backup quarterbacks, Taylor Powell and Connor Bazelak, not so much. This was all about Georgia's defense in my mind. they continue to get better every week and grind you out. They're not flashy, but Jake Fromm is a quarterback, like I talked about those quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I would put him definitely a notch above. He might not be to the level of Tua and Burrow and Lawrence, and I don't know about Fields exactly yet. He's good, but he's also been put in some great scenarios. But Fromm's a good ball player, and he'll be in the NFL, and he could really end up surprising a lot of folks just because he's got it going on between the ears is what he's got. But the big thing for this in my mind was that, they were able to really shut Missouri down defensively. And that's what, if you're looking at Georgia and this thing moving forward, is going to be. It's something I think everybody thought about from the beginning of the year. Great O-line. They can run the ball well. They've got a good quarterback back there that can make that doesn't make them so one-dimensional if need be, but their defense being really good, and they have been.
Yeah, and I mean, it really in this game, if you look, Fromm was not very efficient. He threw for only not even 200 yards in this game. He did have 2 touchdowns, did not turn the ball over, and that's an important thing for him. I mean, remember that his one turnover fest this year is their one blemish on their record. But overall, they win the game. They can run the ball, and like you said, they can play defense. And again, back to that spoiler alert, defense is going to matter in the playoffs more than anything else in my mind. We know teams can score that are in the top. The question is, can they stop other dominant offenses, I guess, or at least playing dominantly. All right, so
before we go, we want to talk. The biggest thing I want to talk about this game is the fact that UGA suffered quite a bit of injuries, and how is that going to play out, especially with not just the SEC championship game. They've got a slobber knocker.
They got 2 tough games in a row.
Yeah, and Jordan Hare. They got to go play Auburn. And
then they got to play A&M, which is not as good, but still it's not a walkthrough.
Yeah, I mean, Cager got hurt with a shoulder injury. They say he's expected to play this Saturday against Auburn. You got Tyson Campbell, D-back, toe injury, unclear if he'll play. Trey Blount, wide receiver, has been unavailable for the previous 2 games, and they don't know if he's going to play this weekend. Justin Schaefer, O-line, didn't play the last 3 games because of neck injury. Don't know if he's going to play. Tommy Bush, out of commission, wide receiver. Owen Condon, tackle, has been sidelined, uncertain whether he'll play. I know they're moving Cade Mays over to center because their center was out. I don't know which guy is their center. It might be Condon. But the big thing is they lost a lot of guys that are really key pieces, especially on the offensive line. I think they have, I'm looking, Justin Schaefer. I think he's the center. And then you got Condon hurt too. So, and that's a big part of their game is that offensive line. So how is that going to affect them against a really good D-line in Auburn?
Yeah. And a tough upcoming schedule, especially making the assumption they make the title game.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on. We got 2 of the biggest games of the week. Pitted, all 4 teams are undefeated going into this week. So we're going to start with the first one, which is Penn State traveling to Minnesota. Boat rowing going on here, I got to say. So there was, there was some hype, but there also was a lot of disrespect to the Minnesota program through the first college football rankings, having them at 17.
Undefeated with all the love in the Big 12 in the Big 10, and again, you had 2-loss team.
2 two-loss teams
in their conference in Michigan in front of them.
Yeah, you had Florida and Auburn ahead of them with 2 losses. So, and again, this is a team that suffered from schedule. They suffered from game control, I would imagine, just looking at it. Someone made a good comment because I think it was their first game of the year against South Dakota State.
Yeah.
It said if they go and win the Big Ten, man, South Dakota State's going to get a lot of recruits because they all go with them.
Listen, South Dakota State is a pretty good team.
Right.
Pretty good team. But in their own conference, they're a pretty good team.
We don't know till we see these teams play. So we line them up. Penn State's probably biggest advantage is on the D-line. They are a speed D-line more so than a hefty D-line.
I think that caused them a lot of problems this game.
It did, because I will tell you what. I sent you this text.
There we go. Here it comes. Massive.
So Bill proceeds to send me a text, and because we were talking about this, that their average size of their D-line I think was like 6'5", 6'6", 340. Okay, so mind you, that's the average. So I'm looking across this D-line or O-line, and I thought they were all midgets. except for the right tackle.
Fa'alele.
If you haven't seen this guy, go and look at him. I told him
6'9", 4 bills.
All right. I looked at him and I said, "Is that the Big Show playing right tackle?"
And look, man, they use it because when they were running the ball and in critical times in this game, they went right up his behind.
Yeah,
buddy.
and make no mistake, this guy's just not some 400-pound
No,
slob.
he was manhandling.
He's a real deal, like a road grader times 10.
This guy, I love that. I mean, this guy he's a wall.
Yep.
He is an absolute wall.
What I loved about this game from Minnesota, they were clearly motivated. They were pissed off about being disrespected. You could tell.
Biggest game there in like 50 years.
Yeah, and they played as tough as they could play. But what I liked the most was they didn't come out and be real conventional. And it would have made sense, with that kind of offensive line against, I won't say a small defensive front, but certainly smaller, no doubt with that size. They came out and really, really pushed the edge here. Morgan was unbelievable in this game. I mean,
under the big lights, he really stepped up.
18 to 20, 339 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Their primary runner, Smith, was 18 of 51 for 2.8 yards a carry. So you're thinking like, okay, well, they probably shut down the run pretty good. But I think to me was the fact that they were willing to push it through the air, which was kind of unexpected. I mean, we had nasty cold weather come through there. They got the size advantage. They got everything. But what I really love is they stayed committed to that running game and kept the balance in this game. And Penn State was struggling to have answers. And the fact of the matter was Minnesota controlled this. Talk about game control.
The whole game.
Minnesota controlled this game. Penn State was struggling over and over and over again to come back in this game and just couldn't do it. At the end, they had, and I want to say in fairness to Penn State, I'm not talking like Penn State went there and took a dump. They didn't. They played a decent game. They just got beat by a better team that day.
I mean, look. First of all, they talked a lot about how PJ Fleck and I like him, great coach. We talked a lot about him, love the guy. But he is. They made mention of how he is very in tune with game control for his team. Knowing when to don't leave timeouts on the board in the half. Knowing when to call them, this, that, and the other. And it really.
You mean head coaches that play the head coach role instead of a coordinator role?
Yeah, dude, he did a really great job. He was very level-headed. They did pull out the pass, just to mix it up a little bit. And Morgan did a great job. If you go back and watch that game, he was going through his progressions and finding guys that. If the first or second read wasn't there, he knew where that third read was and only needed a second to glance in that direction before he ripped it.
18 to 20 is very telling to me. Now, the 1 week
339 yards for 3 TDs.
Right. The 1 weak spot for Penn State, and it was the critical weak spot, was Clifford. Clifford made some bad decisions in this game. I'll give him the last interception just because he had to force the ball at the end of the game. Wasn't a good throw. He actually could have thrown the guy open for a touchdown and won the game, but, there was pressure there. The real key was his other turnovers in this game. Was not efficient. Threw for big yards because he's got some big play guys. His receivers were out there. They ran the ball pretty well against this team, including Clifford. He had almost 4 yards a carry. It's always a mixture. They got Slade. Brown was the one who took the lead in this. Kane didn't play. So, again.
Hamler, their big play receiver, was 7 for $119, 0 TDs. Here's my big thing with that. Clifford, 23 of 43, 340 yards, 1 TD, 3 picks. That Minnesota defense is stout up front. But they got the Winfield kid in the back that is a great center fielder. And we talked about this a few weeks ago with the Penn State game, and the commentator said, wow, he just dropped a dime to Hamler. And we said, I don't know if it was a dime, but he knew how to get the ball up in the air so that his big play receiver could run under it.
And his receivers can outrun most D-backs.
In this game, he tried the same thing, and again, not a dime. He threw it up. The ball hangs in the air too long, and Winfield was watching tape coming into this game, knowing that kid was going to do it, and just said, hey, I'm going to play center field, and when I see him go throw that thing up, I know it's going to hang in the air. It's cold outside. He doesn't throw dimes or lasers, and I'm just going to go under and pick it. And he had a day on Sean Clifford, and that really exposed him. And in this game, all the talk about, man, this Sean Clifford kid, now that McSorley's gone, he is pretty good. In this game, it wasn't him. It was Morgan.
Yep. Yeah, so we're gonna wrap this up, talk about LSU and Alabama. Now, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this game because when we get in and do our talk about the rankings, this game probably is the one
most of the chatter.
Yeah, that's gonna really play into this. But let me just kind of start off this game by just saying, it's very rare in football that you anticipate a game for as long as we've anticipated this game and have it deliver from an excitement and an entertainment standpoint. This game checked all the boxes. Very, very fun game to watch. I'm sure for Alabama and LSU fans, it was a pucker meter, DEFCON 5 kind of deal. But for the fan of other teams, just to watch these two teams go at it, it was interesting. It was the Saban mentality. This was definitely not your old school LSU Alabama game where you would see
not
defense.
A 9-6.
No,
and everybody predicted it to be high scoring, and it was.
Yep.
And hats off to LSU and Coach O and Joe Burrow and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You talked a lot about him in the
that
preview.
guy. Love him.
That guy was running like nobody's business. He did not want to be stopped at any point. It's like every time he got the ball, he was on a mission, and they did a great job. Now, Alabama, to their detriment, had really some silly mistakes in the first half that are not typical of Alabama, and that ultimately, I think, cost them the game with the Tua, fumbling the ball in the red zone, the punter,
muffing the
jacking
punt.
up the punt.
Yep.
Those little things at the end of the day, a 46-41 score. I credit Tua for you see him after the game hobbling. And I know we've talked, is he a soft or not? He toughed it out.
He did.
Look, his shit was hurting, bro. He had surgery 3 weeks ago, and that ain't easy. And he came out and had, the kid went 21 of 40 for 418 yards, 4 TDs, and a pick. So he was, he was doing everything he can. Yep. Najee Harris probably had the game of his career.
He was unbelievable. The 3 stars of this game were the 2 running backs and Joe Burrow. In my mind, they were.
The receivers for Alabama, it surprised me. There were some very uncharacteristic drops and miscues by guys like Jerry Jeudy. Waddle got his thing going, but he's a short game guy.
Yep.
So when they needed that big play strike, usually Judy's that guy, and he didn't get it done as much as you'd like to see. I mean, didn't have a horrible day. I mean, he was 5 for 71 in a TD, but they have ballers all over that receiving core, and that's why they were able to actually come back. I mean, in the second half, they outscored LSU 28-13. But and really, they came out that second half and were shutting them down. But when it came down to it, and they got within 1 score, LSU came out. And their offensive coordinator and their running back and their quarterback got it done and scored to push it back up. And they tried to come back, and then they come back and score to push it back up. Mm-hmm. And they just those 2 drives in the fourth quarter just is all they needed because they had done so much prior to.
Yeah, I'll wrap my part up with this. I'll say what I noticed the difference, and I said this before the game when we talked about it, with the receivers and the difference between Joe Burrow and Tua to me, and I think Joe Burrow just moved ahead of Tua from a pro prospect standpoint.
I don't know if anyone's going to,
And here's why. Burrow threw contested balls. You look at the Moss catch.
Year.
Yep. You look at the Moss catch was awesome. The Chase catch.
Yep.
Which was a
it was a good catch by the receiver, but
absolutely. But they were anticipated throws, meaning Chase had to know he's coming back to get that ball right on the goal line. And I mean, the Moss catch, just the toe touch and the photo of that. Well, that wasn't a touchdown, but it was right on the 1 yard line.
But he did step out. And they said he was pushed out.
But he reestablished, though, right?
I
whatever the rule was.
It's different than the NFL.
But the whole point, yes. But the whole point of it was those were great catches. But I see Joe Burrow's ball placement The difference to me with Alabama is they run free. And Tua's job is to hit them in rhythm because they're running free. But I don't see them catching as many contested balls because I don't see Tua throw as many contested balls. I said before this game it was going to come down to which team committed to the run. I will say they both did, which was awesome.
Yeah, it was good.
Especially
as many points as were on the board.
Yeah, and Edwards-Helaire.
They weren't just like little runs all the time. I mean, people were breaking some off.
Yeah, and Edwards-Helaire was getting hit a lot, and he was running through contact like a champ. Najee Harris, it almost looked like there was no contact, and guys were trying to kill him, and he was like, get off. He was flicking them off like gnats.
I told you I saw that guy after the championship game. He is incredibly big. Incredibly
he's
big.
What I watched.
With having guys like Derrick Henry in that backfield before and these enormous backs, this guy is something else, dude.
Yep,
something
he
else.
is. And I will say, the only thing Alabama could have done a little bit better, which could have changed the shape of this game, was to get Najee Harris involved earlier. I mean, he was involved, but I mean, like literally, there was a point where just give him the ball because he was going 9 yards and just knocking people around. Again, this game delivered. I love what I saw out of both teams. They both have extremely strong offenses, and I left with a lot of questions about their defense.
I was about to say, and SEC fans, you're not going to like it, but the one thing I will say is this looked a little bit like an SEC version of Big 12 defense.
Yeah, there wasn't
much of it. And my one question, I know that LSU's got ballers on the D, Grant Delpit. I know that Bama's got ballers all over their D, young or old. But at the end of the day, the defense, I mean, Alabama allowed 46 I put on them, and LSU allowed 41 put on them. And as we go down the line, that's going to have to sharpen up. Where is that playmaker, that stud, that Chase Young, that can take over a game if you need to shut it down, especially in critical situations?
Yep, absolutely.
So we'll wrap that, and then we're going to jump right into the preview for this week. All right, so now we're going to get into a quick preview of the games of importance this coming weekend, which is Week 12, correct, Dave?
Yes.
Week 12, okay. And for those that have questioned, this is a season where he had a Week 0 week at the beginning of the year,
right,
causing 2 bye weeks for everybody this year. Mm-hmm. This is the first year that's happened. Is that correct?
I don't remember it happening before.
I don't before either, but some people are like, "Oh, that's always happened." If it hasn't always happened, if it's maybe just in recent years, but this is the first year I remember Week 0. Nonetheless, talk about some games this weekend. Important, really brief. Touch on the 2 big players from the LSU-Alabama game this weekend. You have Alabama traveling to Mississippi State. I don't know if you'll see Tua play. They may not need him. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
Mississippi
get him
State,
ready for the Iron Bowl.
Yeah, I mean Mississippi State. The only bonus they have is that they had a bye last week, so they could rest. But the game before that, they waxed Arkansas, who's obviously not much. They fired Coach Morris. They got beat down by LSU, A&M. Tennessee beat Miss State. So I don't think it'll be much of a challenge for Alabama, but that's kind of where they're headed. And I guess the bigger picture for that is Tua going to play. On the other side, LSU travels to Ole Miss. Again, Ole Miss, not a very good team. Alabama throttled them 59-31. They've gotten beat by Missouri. They got beat by Texas A&M. They got beat by Auburn. The big question for this game is there were a lot of injuries that LSU took in that victory to Alabama.
Probably about 8 or 9 guys hit the ground throughout the game.
Correct. So the way I'm looking at it right now, starting offensive tackle Sadiq Charles is unlikely to take the field because he has an unspecified injury. Another starting offensive lineman, Austin Deculus, not expected to play. It says due to a day of rest, but obviously there's something there. They're a backup defensive end. Neil Farrell exited the game with a lower right leg injury. Unclear if he'll play. one of their big play guys on the defense, cornerback Christian Fulton, left last week's game with a lower leg injury. Unexpected, or well, unknown whether he'll play. And then they have a couple other guys, three guys that have really, the problems have been there since before last week. But Glenn Logan, D-end, he left the game with an ankle injury, unknown whether he'll play. So really on that offensive line, considering Joe Burrow's their guy, and even in running the ball, that's the biggest question. And I don't think that it'll cause LSU a problem to take care of this game, but continue to stay healthy as they proceed is going to be a bigger thing.
Yeah, and LSU overall, their schedule, is pretty. They got Arkansas after that, and then I think they have another game. They have A&M. A&M is the last game. So So their schedule is not particularly daunting. A&M being the toughest on the slate that they've got. But again, this is the other thing too is. Letdowns do happen. Now, these are not teams. I mean, these are multi-touchdown spreads on these games. So expectation is not that it'll happen, but just something to pay attention to. It's tough. You get on that high, and then things happen. And that could be for both teams.
Yeah, how do you handle success? I mean, look, we've seen Alabama. We know that. And I know LSU is a good team, but, everything leading – it's been all about them beating Alabama. And now that they've done that, how do they handle that?
Yep.
Can they continue progressing? I don't see why they couldn't, obviously, but listen, man, if you just kind of, put everything out there in this last game and think that you don't have anything left in front of you, you better watch out.
You can make a mistake.
Yeah.
Yep, so absolutely.
That's kind of the bigger picture. 3:30 Saturday on ABC, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, who were ranked, I think, 18 in last week's poll, lost. I don't know how, quite frankly, because Virginia Tech, not a bad team, but they've seemed to be kind of a mess most of the year. Lost to Virginia Tech last week in Blacksburg. Not a good look for them. They dropped to 7-2, Wake Forest does, and get bounced out of this ranking. They come in to take on my Tigers. It would have been better if were still in the ranking for us, but it is what it is. We just got to win out. Their quarterback got back last week. He seemed to be doing okay. The big story, I think, in this game is superstar wide receiver Sage Surratt for Wake Forest, and he is good. We've talked about him all year long. He's a sophomore, but he'll be in the NFL one day.
Yep.
He is out for the season,
Yep.
so that helps us tremendously because he's a guy going into this game. If I were to point on somebody we got to watch out for, that's the guy. Now, they have some other really good receivers, and, their quarterback, he's done a great job, Jamie Newman. So we'll see how it fares against my Tigers, but I would expect that we just continue to roll, and we're going to not come off the gas.
Yeah, I mean, this game, and I think this spread is legit. It's a short and curly, short of 5 scores. So, I mean, again, Wake's going in the wrong direction. Newman was okay, but not great. I mean, his efficiency was pretty bad last week, which, Virginia Tech did some things to really confuse him in the game. Again, losing their top receiver is rough.
Hats off to Bud Foster.
Yeah.
Getting that win last week.
Yep.
I think that might have been their last home game of the season.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a guy definitely, you talk about your coordinators. This is a guy, a lifelong coordinator. Reminds me a hell of a lot of a guy that's really really near and dear to my heart, and Mickey Andrews. Just a guy that's evolved with the game. So great for him. Love to see Virginia Tech send him out in a good note.
Yeah.
But
I like Bud Foster.
Yeah, and they gave Wake all they could handle in Blacksburg. And the truth is, look, the committee has already done all its damage to Clemson, and now Clemson's looking to damage everybody else. And I think Wake just happens to be in their way right now.
We just got to keep doing our thing, put the blinders on, put the earplugs in, strap on your helmet, line them up and go. We need to take care of business, and we need to take care of business really in a big way again. Unfortunately, I mean, even if we win, it's a win. We're still fine. I think for our own sake, we need to, prove to everybody that we are still who we've been. I mean, we know that we can handle success. I don't care what you say about this team being different than last year's team from the players on the field. We still have the same coaching staff, and we preach over and over how important that is in college football. And even to the point of Bud Foster, here's a guy that was potentially the heir apparent to Frank Beamer. And they bring in Fuente, and Fuente asks him to stay on the staff, and he does. And he shuts his mouth, does his job. It's like us. A lot of our guys have been, why aren't these guys going to head coaching job? Well, they're in a good situation. They like what they're doing, good place for their family, and they like, and the program's in a good place. So that's kind of the mantra that you see from a guy like Foster, and yes, I'm glad he went out on a good note. But we need to take care of business against Wake this weekend, and then we get a little break ski, and then we go for the in-state for the state championship game at the end of the month against South Carolina, who allowed App State to get back in the top 25.
Yep.
Let's move on to the next game this week that you might want to pay attention to, and that is the Golden Gophers. Again, you talk about handling success.
Yep.
They are Iowa has been, they're 6-3. You said it before. They have just as many field goals as they do touchdowns. Nate Stanley, the quarterback for Iowa, good, but that's about it. There's nothing really dynamic out of Iowa. I think the bonus Iowa has, which we've mentioned before in talking about the Hawkeyes, is they can be tough to beat at home in Kinnick. And Minnesota has to go to Kinnick off of a big win, very emotional win, and continue their streak to show that they are worthy.
Yeah, here's the important thing I think for everybody to notice when you're talking about this Iowa team. Iowa beat Iowa State. It's a good team, only by a score on the road. But, Iowa lost to Michigan, who has definitely turned it on. Really, I think that game was kind of a turning point for Michigan.
Because then they played – yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and so Michigan 10-3, so a single touchdown score. Then they got Penn State at home. Penn State won 17-12, so it was another close game there. And then they lost to Wisconsin on the road by 2 points. So this is not a team that's been getting bounced hard by anybody. This is a game, like you said, can Minnesota handle success? More importantly, can they keep their emotions at the right level in this game? Because this is by no means a walkthrough for them. Any one of these teams can give them a game. So, Iowa, it's in Iowa. Again, so just all those things kind of playing against them. I like the way they're playing, but they've got to come in. They got to come in level in this game in order to. And if they don't, then spark all they are who we thought they were crap and all the stuff that comes along with
17, and I get it with their strength of schedule, all that, but here again, it's coaching. I do believe that PJ Fleck has these guys focused enough that it's next game mentality. This is a tough one. You can't just overlook Iowa. Now after that, they'll go to Northwestern, which obviously Northwestern isn't the team that won the Big Ten West.
Who's that? Minnesota?
Northwestern.
Oh no, but who's playing Northwestern?
Minnesota goes to Northwestern next week. Okay. And then they end the season at home against Wisconsin, which is a plus because Wisconsin can be tough, but they at least get them at home. So everybody knew leading up to this point in the season that Minnesota's toughest schedule was in front of them,
right?
And it sure is. But, I just truly believe in PJ Fleck and the way he manages the game, the way he manages his team, and I think this is going to be a slow game. I mean, last week's game was a bit of a surprise, to be honest. 31-26 with Penn State. That's a lot more points on the board than I kind of expected.
Yep.
I thought it was going to be more of the Big Ten that you're used to seeing, a 20-17 or something like that.
Yep.
I kind of think that it could be like that in this game, unless Minnesota gets out big, because that's the one thing. I don't think that Iowa has enough
I agree.
to catch up if Minnesota gets ahead.
But Iowa doesn't get blown up by anybody.
No, I mean, at no point in this season have I really seen them get.
And this is think about this. This is a very dangerous game for Minnesota, not just obviously because they're trying to play for this title, But understand, if they lose this game, they could lose their seat at the Big Ten title game because they got to play Wisconsin. If Wisconsin wins, maintains their record,
for all the marbles.
that would be for who gets to come out of the West. So it's not over, and they really need to be focused in this game. And I will tell you, as good as PJ Fleck is, you always say this. We're talking about 18 to 22-year-old men. Listen, they got all the hype, and they deserved it. They deserved it. I really believe it. But that's a hard thing to handle. And you just, again, this is an Iowa team that if you look at them historically, while you don't necessarily see them playing the big end of the year bowl game because they don't generally win the Big Ten, they ruin seasons.
Yep.
Look at them. Year after year, they ruin good team seasons.
Yep.
And this is earmarked as one of those types of games. Again, I think Minnesota comes away with the win. I think Fleck is that good of a coach.
Yep.
But I don't think this is going to be easy. And I would be very disappointed to see if they did win this game, and even if it was close, that they get flack for that, because I think underestimating this Iowa team is a huge mistake. They can still play defense. They can still run the ball, and when they run the ball well, and Stanley's serviceable. Like, he's not trash, but he's just not – he's not going to bring you back, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, players like your Chase Youngs. There is a guy on their team who hasn't been spoken a lot of and had started off the year on fire, has quieted down a little bit since then. But their defensive end, A.J. Epineza for Iowa, is a potential first-round draft pick. I mean, he is good. So, we'll see if he's able to have an impact on the team or on the Minnesota offense, I guess, and make Morgan a little uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, I believe that, Minnesota will get it done and continue to prove its worth. I don't think that they're too high. I mean, I really believe that the LSU players would be way more on a high, and than this Minnesota team. I think they're just trying to prove their worth every week.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the committee, again, we'll get into this a little bit later, still gave them some motivation. So I think they're going to be there. So let's move on to the next game. Big game here. Really more so one side than the other, but Oklahoma traveling down to Waco, and
game day is going to be there,
and taking on the undefeated Baylor Bears. Baylor's looking for this opportunity to prove that they're legit and for real. Certainly, their game control, their lack of style points has probably been the biggest hurt to them. They've been outside of the top 10 through this past week and undefeated, and they just keep kind of taking care of business, figuring out ways to win. We talked a little bit wrapping up their game last week is that their inability to score touchdowns at times is concerning for this team, but certainly can bring the defense, a team that was left for dead just a few years ago, and has really kind of risen. And again, they're playing Oklahoma. As we said, the Big 12 does not have a good national perception right now. The power of these types of wins. Oklahoma beating Baylor would be kind of more like, it's kind of what we've expected and waited for just based off what I'm hearing and seeing and the way they're being ranked. But on the other end, Baylor goes and beats Oklahoma. We got to have a conversation now because you got an undefeated team that's getting it done. So this one should be fun. I kind of like the high-powered offense of Oklahoma versus that stingy defense of Baylor. Let's see how this one plays out. Who can game plan the best? Obviously, the key is shutting down Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's we've now come to the point, I think, in the season, like we said in the recap, where Oklahoma's defense is starting to look a lot more like their defense of the past. So I think that Baylor has some serious offensive weapons that can definitely stay in the game with them. But to your point, can they shut down Jalen Hurts? Can they shut down CeeDee Lamb?
Yep.
Is CeeDee Lamb going to have an entire defense have to chase after him? Now, I will say this. Baylor's defense, don't overlook them. They're all right, and they're fast. When I watch them, they're a lot though they might play a little bit to level of their competition, they're a lot faster than a lot of the defenses in that Big 12, and they can tackle. And they can be very stingy at times. It's going to be interesting, man, and this could be game one of a two-game, series. We see this rematch very likely could happen in the Big 12 championship game. And man, I mean, there could be a lot of chaos thrown into this mix, whether depending on who, either side, depending on who wins this game.
Yep.
You know, I mean, like, you know, because then you got you know, Texas is still looming. They somehow squeaked Texas into the back end of the rankings this week. I don't understand. I just don't think they're that good. Their defense is porous. I know they have injuries and they're getting guys back. That doesn't mean anything to me at this point in time. It's very late in the season, and you really are throwing, you know, a toss-up here in hopes that they can backdoor their way to the Big 12 championship somehow, which is going to require a lot of chaos just in the Big 12. I don't understand. Nonetheless, I definitely think that this game, you know, it's game day is going to be there. Matt Rule is a guy that we said it before. He has done some really good things with this team, and I just don't think you can overlook that. This team will grind you out. Again, they may play a little bit to the level of the competition, but you said at the beginning of the cast of the recap, what really matters is what comes after that dash.
Yep.
And what does Baylor have after that dash? A big goose egg. Their goal is to keep that there.
Yep, absolutely. This game, while, you know, maybe again national perception might devalue it a little bit, this game's important, very important to how this all plays out.
Yep.
So we're going to move on to the last game, and this involves one of the teams in the top 4 right now. Got the Georgia Bulldogs heading to Jordan-Hare and taking on the Auburn Tigers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something to be said for Auburn kind of starting this off is that, you know, Auburn has that, I guess I'd call it their signature win, is that Oregon win in the first week of the season against Herbert in a game that Oregon controlled till the end, and Bo Nix was able to help drive them back. Since then, they've taken on 2 losses, one to Florida, the other to LSU, in some relatively close games.
Well, not the Florida one. So, I mean, it was closer than the score.
Yeah.
But the LSU game, man,
That was
a close one.
Yep.
And you're talking about with, you know, the big bugaboo about Auburn has been, you know, is Nix, a true freshman quarterback, able to step up. And, you know, we saw in the Florida game that really kind of cost them. But, you know, the LSU game, you know, the guy gave it all they could. I mean, they lost 23-20 in that game. And, you know, this D-line is great. It's still, in my mind, the best D-line in the country. And they continue to step up every single week. So what does that mean for Georgia, especially with some of those injuries we just rolled down on their offensive line? You know, Georgia needs to keep you know, what Georgia has is their defense is playing really well. And that against true freshman quarterback Nix could really spell the end for Auburn in this game, but they've got to play like it. They can't let down. That defense needs to continue their upward trajectory, and every week look better and better and better. And believe me, they have a shot. Yep. The flip side of this thing, and we'll talk about it probably more when we talk about these rankings, is if Auburn pulls this one off, buddy, there is a lot of potential chaos about to happen.
Yep.
And
particularly in the SEC.
And then what happens? Is the SEC squirming, or is the SEC sitting even better, quite frankly, in a weird way?
Yep. Very possible. Georgia, you know, we talked a little bit about when we talked about the Mizzou game. They came down. They got some injuries. You know, this is kind of what's going to be interesting in this is Georgia has been able to run the ball well. With the exception of that one game, he's a gamer. Like, this is one thing you got to say about him. He's a gamer. You could talk all you want. He is not flashy. He's not Joe Burrow. He's not Tua. He's not Herbert. He's not any of those guys.
He's a player too, man. I tell you something.
But he is a gamer.
He gives all the credit in the world to everybody but himself on that offense.
And I like this kid. When the chips are on the table, he's a kid I'd put my money on. So this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, if you're looking at it, if all things are equal in this game, okay, you got a good defense in Auburn, especially on their D-line. You got a good defense in Georgia. You got a good run game on the offensive side of the ball for Georgia. Solid run game for Auburn. Both lines are pretty good. Georgia's probably a little better, although they're banged up now. It might even that plane. If all things are equal, and I mean, because, you know, Seth Williams, great receiver for Auburn, but their receivers are what Nix provides them to be. If it comes down to quarterback on quarterback, it's not even a question.
Yeah. I got to be honest with you. Georgia wins out in the regular season and plays in the title game and goes head-to-head with Tua. Most people would say big-time advantage Tua. I would quote my boy Lee Corso and say, not so fast, my friend. Fromm is a big game player.
Burrow?
Oh, sorry, Tua. I'm sorry, I meant Burrow.
Yeah, but I agree with you.
Either one.
I think, and look, by all means, does Joe Burrow have himself lined up, especially at this point in the season, to run away with this Heisman, barring anything, disastrous? But that's something that I think, you said it. He's a gamer. I think Fromm could look at that and be like, I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't care.
Don't get me wrong. Burrow's the better quarterback.
Yeah.
Burrow's a better quarterback. I'm just saying it's not a runaway because Fromm, he plays within himself. He does not. This is the key part to him. He's been punched in the mouth before in games, and he doesn't get rattled. And he's proven it. I mean, we got to remember what this kid did as a freshman.
Yep.
And he was not a heralded freshman by any stretch of the imagination. No. And what he did, I mean, this is a guy, let's just plain and simple, this is a guy that ran Justin Fields out of town.
He ran Jacob Eason, then Justin
true. Oh, sorry.
Fields.
Yeah, Jacob Eason.
2 5-star, number 1 quarterback, and in some rankings, number 1 overall recruits out of high school, ran them both out of town.
Yeah, so this game's interesting. Now, I think there are some flaws in Georgia, and I think you mentioned the flaw in Auburn right now is their quarterback one year early on this one. Just can he put it all together because he's had a few games. Now, what is good? I'm going to play another scenario that's going to be very interesting to me. We talk about all these values of wins and all these things. Let's play out that Auburn loses to Georgia and then loses to Alabama. A lot of people are hanging their hat on these Auburn games and how they're winning and, the value of that. Now you got a 4-loss team that really, while they got that signature win against Oregon, all the rest of their wins are not very good. So that could be another interesting play in all this. So either way this one plays out, I think it creates a little bit of chaos either way, given the fact that the SEC could very well not sport an undefeated team going into the title game. I know everybody's real high on LSU, but going into the college playoff, you could have, because I think if this Georgia team wins out, LSU's gonna have their hands full. So, and that's certainly assuming that they're the ones that win it, which it looks like they would be. But
this is
interesting.
One of the great things. This is the Deep South's oldest rivalry. This is the cross conference game. They always play each other every year, and this thing's been going on. The two teams first played each other in 1892, and then they renewed the annual. There was basically a hiatus, and then they renewed the annual meeting in 44. They've had a total of 123 games since last year between each other. This is an old-ass rivalry.
Yep.
There's a lot more that goes into this than just where these teams stand in terms of the playoffs. This is a slobber knocker, man.
Yep.
And I expect nothing less. I don't think it'll be that high scoring. I don't think one team is going to get blanked. But it's at the end of the day, I do like Jake Fromm, man. I think he's going to be the difference in where Georgia goes for the rest of the year. And
kind of interesting, this is a 41 over/under. That's kind of low in NFL standards. That's super low in college football. Mm-hmm. So that tells you that they think this one's going to be a struggle. I think it's all going to come down probably to your basics. It's going to be turnovers. Particularly on Georgia's side, because that's going to mean, can they control that defensive line? I think their running game really helps them do it. DeAndre Swift, great running back. I like the kid a lot. I watched him play when Georgia's offense was really kind of struggling there for a little while earlier in the year, and that kid was breaking tackles like a champ. Yeah. So he's Najee Harris knocks people down, and that's how he breaks tackles. Swift is just slippery, and he's not tiny, but he is slippery. Yeah. He knows how to be elusive. He knows how to absorb and deflect shots. A really talented running back who I like a lot. So this game could be a lot of fun. And if Nix happens to have one of his better games, it could be really fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's this is, who again, if you're gonna lay all the cards on the table and all else being equal, and it's quarterback on quarterback, I'm gonna lean from. But
Yep.
you never know. I
Yep.
mean, like, look, Malzahn, as much flack as he takes, he can be very innovative on that offensive side. So is he able to help his young quarterback and scheme and put him in position to make some plays that George is not expecting?
Yeah, and on the interesting side, I'll kind of throw a little bit of a last nugget in here on this one, but there's talk with the Arkansas job opening up, Malzahn being a big-time Arkansas high school football coach. I believe that's as a coach there, right? He went there before when he left, but came back to Auburn.
Then he also went when he was the OC at Auburn, and then after they won the title with Cam, he went to or maybe it was Fitzgerald, but then he went to Arkansas State to be a head coach. But he is an Arkansas guy. If not, he's like a
because
West
don't you remember
Texas
I remember exactly how he ended up in Auburn. If you'll remember, I think he was the #1 quarterback recruit, Mitch Mustaine. He was his high school coach, and he ended up going to Auburn. They hired him under what's that guy's name? Who was the Auburn coach before him? Oh my God, I'm blanking. Chizik. Thank you. Under Chizik. So, that's kind of going to be an interesting little storyline because there is some talk, because there's been grumblings about, Malzahn falling out of favor. So again, I go back to if they go with 4 losses,
fans,
do they let him walk?
No matter where they are, I know Auburn fans. They still bitch about.
They hate their coach.
Yeah, Gus Malzahn. Even though they're 7-2.
Yep.
And they had some big games, and I think the biggest game they had. I know you mentioned Oregon, but I think the biggest game was keeping it close with LSU.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and look, it's not tough to play at Auburn, so that's going to be another task that Georgia is going to have to overcome.
It is tough to play at Auburn.
Yeah, it is tough. Sorry. That's another task Georgia has to deal with. They're not at home. They're on the road in this one.
Yeah, this one I just want to mention because I want to, even though we're not big on Vegas lines, Ohio State, #2, plays Rutgers. Give me a guess what you think the over-under is.
The over-under or the spread?
The over-under.
70 points.
61.
Okay.
Give me a guess what the spread is.
5 touchdowns.
52 points.
Oh, my gosh.
So I guess the belief in Vegas is that Rutgers is probably going to score at best like a touchdown. I'm not even sure that's going to happen.
No, this is like they're playing a high school team.
This could be a slaughter of epic proportions. I guarantee you Fields may not even finish the first half.
Well, I mean, look, they've already gotten rid of their head coach at Rutgers, so they're in limbo. They're waiting for hopefully Schiano to come back, it sounds like.
I think Rutgers has been in limbo since they played the first college football game against Princeton.
Yeah. So that's going to wrap it up for the recap and preview for college football, Week 11 recap, Week 12 preview. We're going to break this up, get it up and out. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening. Gridiron 360, baby. We're going to jump in here really quick with some chaos chatter about the college football playoff.